City living isn't for everyone, especially in a city when we have a country with so many other places to live, rural or in a suburb. I've lived in both rural and I have to add remote isolated rural, as well as very urban suburbs. My living situations have been possible when I analyse and compare them to my relationship status, health, employment prospects, including demographics and my preferences. I see it today as a very practical experience and not in any way connected to the ideals of idyllic lifestyles of any normal person, especially as we're facing high supermarket prices for food and the increasingly difficult pressures of the cost of living altogether. So how does a cosmic wahine navigate these terms and conditions while holding on to her own beliefs and the truth of being a living, breathing, moving human on this planet in amongst the press of devastation pouring out from the Gaza Strip and all other world issues that call to us, all while we deal with a day-to-day of being ourselves? I wanted to address wahine safety in accommodation. I know this is a very subjective statement, as many of us don't live 100% in safety, and we are continuously navigating minefields in our places of work where we strive for meaning, our homes and the very locations we've chosen to house our hopes, dreams, loves, art, intellect, what we want for our present and futures. If this interests you, then welcome to this week's talking blog for the 11th of August 2025. Tēnā koutou katoa. If you're returning, then kia ora. My name is Ciana Reimond. I'm a creative who finds expression in the mediums of writing, art and video making for a start. Hobson Street in the Auckland CBD is a place that you'd want to walk with mindfulness and being aware. From St Matthew's Church towards the motorway going south or west, there are individuals seeking the resources and services of the Auckland City Mission who are more lost than found. Compassion is a truth, but common sense is a character strength. Still, there's ample foot traffic during the day, but closer to sunset, it's advised to be careful. Weekends, the city empties out and Nelson and Hobson Streets are quiet, save for the traffic on the road. I bring this up first to illustrate how different the characteristics of the CBD are to where the main drag and all the shops are located. Though there are some really cool locations towards the Sky City complex and beyond, it does attract elements that I'd consider best avoiding. Though I've walked from the CBD central area to Ponsonby, often walking the Wellesley Street route over to Victoria Park Market and climbing up Franklin Road to Ponsonby Road. And I've done that during the day and found it to be a really good walk. I've never encountered anyone making me feel uncomfortable. That discomfort only happens in the inner city, once or twice when I'm on Hobson Street waiting for a bus to take me out west, or on the trains and buses. If you recall, I mentioned in my talking blog last week the practice of defensive walking. I've never had the need to use it in the last 5 years, but once upon a time I certainly did. I've been a follower of many social media sites and have accounts in Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and Blue Sky. I see many posts of an entertainment nature, and then many recently about women's health and how many see us organising ourselves, administrating our own finances and successes, as well as overcoming failure and the fall from social graces. There aren't many women covering the subject of inner city living and why women are drawn to it when we'd rather live in a house with a backyard and front porch, have our own letterbox and a place to park our cars or our bikes. Apartment living is so intense and yet convenient and safe to a degree, yeah. To most parts it is safe. If we can get along with flatmates and or siblings that can live together, then I know those are good options too. I suppose when we're maturing into a new phase and outlook on life, the ability to adapt to another person in a living situ, well, if we're in a relationship following that bargain, then we still look for safety in the form of boundaries and respect for values of space and privacy. In 2015, I'd moved back to the city from a remote rural community where I lived on my own in a small Cody cottage. And by Cody, I mean that's the make of the wood. Cody, for those of you who are not familiar with it, Cody is a type of tree here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and the cottage I lived in was about, at that time, close to 200 years old, because it had been built so last century. And I was there while I learned about my Māori culture and language in a mātauranga course that ran for 3 years. I'll talk about that experience in another talking blog. Anyway, I moved into a place in St. John's that was student accommodation / boarding house, which was okay before they became pariahs during and after COVID-19, particularly for housing some of the most concerning elements of mixing the everyday individual up with clients of corrections and gangs. I was ignorant of all that till COVID locked us down and closed the doors so that we couldn't come and go so easily. I lived a life in a bubble. I got to see how other people were facing up to life and the conditioning that landed them in their predicament and the patterns with beliefs I had hidden that brought them all into my life. Studying full-time, chasing the dream of a higher education, believing it'll solve all my work and career issues, turned out to be not quite what I expected, but still surprising and in a delightful way, somewhat enchanting. But with less of ta-da and more of the quiet hi there. Read more about this on my website, Waimātou at WordPress. I'll put the link in the description. I explain more about that in About Me. So St. John's Glen Innes started to unravel once I was on foot. That was in 2018. I had a car when I moved in 2015. But I hardly used it due to being a poor mature student and the trains and buses being so handy and car maintenance was so expensive. I sold it. That's when I noticed the safety issues on the streets that I walked to and from the supermarket and the train station. There were constant accostings and men approaching me for money and considerations. These were often from guys who were in cars. That was scary, abduction. Whauta Matthew Ave was not a heavily foot-trafficked location. I would often and many times find myself being the only woman walking the footpath to my destination at any one time, and if I saw a guy coming towards me, I'd cross over the road without hesitation, and I didn't care how it made them feel. My radar was so finely tuned that I could spot the danger a mile away. It was during my master's degree study that I began research as well on the topic of women's safety, as I met a lot of women who were working their way through full-time / part-time study, single, unaccompanied, carving out a life and a place for themselves in this world. I wanted to find out if they, like me, had these uncomfortable experiences during their travels in the everyday instances of urban city living. Having a car does put us out of harm's way with those on foot finding opportunities which they and we always know would collide or cross our paths, spring out at us or simply invade us up close and personal. It was while I was working part-time on the weekends for 3 years. I had a late shift at an insurance company. I started work at 11:30 a.m. and finished at 7:30 p.m. It was okay during summer, but winter and the end of daylight savings was challenging. The money was excellent though, and as you know, it counted to me as a student who wanted to thrive rather than survive. I encountered some of the scariest guys during this time, and I wished I could afford a car and study and live and all that, but alas, I was confined to using public transport. Fortunately, the company was only metres away from the bus stop, but at the other end, St. John's, I had a 400-metre walk to get home. Winter time, it was very dark by 8:30 p.m. and I'd often run the distance. Not bad for a woman in her 50s. When COVID came, I expected Felton Matthew and GI to be busier with foot traffic when we were all allowed out to shop. Plentiful foot traffic is every unaccompanied woman's dream come true, but no, it was dead quiet. During one walk that I had to GI carrying an ordinary everyday bag, it was not even heavy or exciting. A guy pulled up on the opposite side of the road offering me a lift. He called out, "Hey, te wahine, te wahine. Do you want a lift with that heavy bag?" He was in a Toyota station wagon. Of course, I declined with a swift shake of my head. He got a bee in his bonnet and took off doing a skid to save his fragile male ego. I consider maybe other women might have accepted his invitation, and I'm saying no for the truth of being that we were worlds apart from each other. And I could bet you anything he'd have done me some damage. It was then that I thought there's got to be a better way, but I can't be any more aware of my safety when they're in a car and I'm on foot. The location, I figured, was an issue. St. John's and GI were places that people travelled through all the time, going in directions that would take them to east and south. I had to relearn all my self-defense lessons of looking like I didn't want trouble, keeping my head up and staying alert, being staunch and giving off unapproachable vibes. When I lived in that remote rural community in the little cottage alone, I still don't know how I did that. It was such a major life change, and I was often nervous and anxious being out there on my own. My closest neighbour was a scream away. On foot, they were 400 metres maybe. I lived up the end of a long driveway that was 100 metres from the road. I kept the gate closed and locked. At night I'd hear them, the youth of the area, doing donuts on the metal surface road below my property. Nothing ever happened to me, and I loved the green freshness of the place, but I was lonely and glad for the course to be over. Living like that is something a person plans for when they leave the city to go to the country. Locals have it in their genes. From 2012 to 2015, I chose this life. There's so little Wi-Fi and even less cell phone coverage. When it rained, we were cut off, sometimes for several days. Storms would take out electricity. It rained heavily and often, no matter what the season. And if you had to go back to town to pick up anything that you might have forgot from the shops, that was an hour away. So it was all like that. My fierce, I can give it a go 50s woman was in charge, and I know as I reflect back on that time that I did indeed do a personality jump into that half mistake, half success experience. I was going into a fully immersive Māori community experience, and my process of decolonisation at that point wasn't enough to carry me over the line. Still, I did make friends and become part of our marae. There were many valuable learnings that I got from this connection. So I can see now that it's coming up to the 15 minutes, and you know, I've got this rule about not going over. So for now, I've still got a part 2 to this kōrero, this week's blog, talking blog, and I will do part 2 for you next Monday. And until then, stay you, and I'll do the best to stay me and go well. This is Ciana Reimond signing off for this week's talking blog.